let's get into this. We're diving into a film review today, specifically Mary Munoz's review of A House in Jerusalem over on Moviescramble. Our plan is really to unpack this review, understand the film through Mary's eyes. It's a film that tries to blend grief, family stuff, ghosts even, and, well, a pretty heavy political backdrop.
Yeah, and what's interesting right off the bat is how the reviewer, Mary, kind of frames it. She notes how films often use grief and ghosts together, right? Sometimes it's for scares, sometimes it's more about comfort when characters are really low, and this film definitely uses that combo, but maybe the review suggests in its own particular way.
Right, and the basic setup, according to the review, is this. You've got a father, Michael, played by Johnny Harris, and his daughter, Rebecca, that's Miley Locke. They move from the UK to Jerusalem. It's about a year after the mother, died. They're looking for a fresh start in the dad's old family house. But Rebecca's having a tough time. The reviewer says she's acting outside of herself.
Mm-hmm. And that tough time leads into, well, the film's core mystery. Rebecca starts seeing another young girl, a ghost apparently, named Rasha, played by Scheherazade Farrell. Rasha seems to come out of this old well on the property, saying she's waiting for her family. But the thing is, only Rebecca can see her.
Yeah, so that ghost is clearly central. Now, the review also makes it clear this personal story isn't happening in, like, a bubble. Mary Munoz states the film is set against a wider political context. She specifically mentions the Nakba and the ongoing occupation, and she notes the timing feels pertinent. Now, just to be super clear for everyone listening, we're only reporting on how this specific reviewer discusses the film's engagement with politics. We aren't taking any sides or endorsing any political views mentioned here. We're just trying to understand Mary Munoz's perspective on how the film handles these complex themes.
Absolutely. That's crucial context for understanding the review itself. So, okay, with that framework from the reviewer laid out, where does she think the film actually succeeds? Because she definitely highlights some strengths.
Yeah, she does. She really zooms in on the two young actresses. The review says Miley Locke, who plays Rebecca, and Scheherazade Farrell, who plays Rasha, work really well together. She calls their character work and performances excellent. And it's not just vague praise, she gives specifics.
Right, she really drills down. For Miley Locke as Rebecca, the review talks about this palpable tension, describes her as an angry kid, and rightfully so, which is quite a statement. But Mary Munoz also sees the vulnerability underneath. She mentions tears that constantly prick at her eyes, suggesting this need for comfort. And the reviewer liked that Locke delivered all that complexity without seeming precocious, without seeming like a mini-adult actor,
Yeah, that's a good point. And then there's Scheherazade Farrell as Rasha. The review calls her, quite vividly, the most adorable ghost you'll ever see. You can tell the reviewer was really struck by her look. Huge brown eyes, sweeping eyelashes, and a petted lip. Mary says these features just pull you into Rasha's story, her fate. That kind of specific description really helps you picture what the reviewer saw on screen.
It really does. And the reviewer sees the bond between these two girls as a major plus. Mary Munoz suggests they connect through this shared trauma of being abandoned, even though their situations are, vastly different. The review says their scenes together, the dialogue, it all feels plausible, and actually calls these scenes some of the best of the film.
Okay, so that central relationship between the girls seems to be a real highlight for the reviewer. But then, let's shift to how the reviewer sees the film handling that bigger picture, the political context we mentioned earlier. That seems to be where things get a bit more complicated in the review.
Yeah, this is where Mary Munoz introduces some significant critiques alongside her observations. She suggests the film feels squarely aimed at younger viewers. The focus on the two young leads is part of what makes her think that.
Okay, aimed at younger viewers, but does she think it simplifies things too much?
Well, she clarifies it's not necessarily reductive in how it mentions things like the Nakba or the occupation. But she also says it certainly doesn't ever aim for anything truly hard-hitting. So it acknowledges things, but maybe doesn't dig too deep, according to her. And that leads into what seems like a core criticism for the reviewer. Mary Munoz finds it strange, her word, that the film doesn't really explore the idea of Rebecca, moving into this house in Jerusalem, potentially being seen as a settler or an invader.
Yeah.
Even though Rebecca herself is obviously unaware of all that historical weight.
That feels like a pretty specific point the reviewer is making. What does she think the film does instead of exploring that?
Well, Mary feels that instead of grappling with that complexity, the film chooses to pair Rebecca and Rasha up as two sides of the one coin. And the reviewer immediately pushes back against the idea. She argues they clearly cannot and will not ever be two sides of the same coin, given the huge differences in their historical contexts and experiences.
Wow, okay. So that pairing is something the reviewer really questions in terms of the film's political message, or lack thereof.
It definitely seems to be a central part of her critique, yeah. It suggests she felt the film kind of sidestepped a chance to engage more deeply there. And beyond the politics, Mary Munoz also talks about a sense of, like, genre confusion. She found the film a little muddled along the way.
Muddled how? Like, it couldn't decide what it wanted to be.
Pretty much. The review asks, is it supposed to be scary? She suggests any horror elements are quickly dispatched, so probably not. Is it meant as a political story? She mentions a moment where Rebecca is suddenly confronted by vicious-looking Israeli police officers, which felt maybe a bit jarring or underdeveloped in that context. Or is it mainly about loss and grief? But then she notes the father, Michael, doesn't seem to fully get Rebecca's way of mourning, so none of these quite stick in her view.
So that feeling of it not quite knowing its own identity seems key for the reviewer. Did she mention any specific plot issues too, things that didn't quite add up?
She did. The main one she points out is how Rebecca manages to travel by bus all the way to Aida refugee camp in Bethlehem, apparently with no cash and no ID. The reviewer finds this hard to believe, given the reality of numerous checkpoints in that area.
Ah, right. Those kinds of details can definitely break the spell if they don't feel believable.
Exactly. And she uses that example to support her feeling that the film's internal logic can wobble a bit. She also casually mentions the final plot twist wasn't much of a surprise, saying you could probably figure it out well beforehand.
Okay, so taking all these points together, the strengths with the actors, the issues with politics, genre, plot, logic, what's the reviewer's overall takeaway? How successful does Mary Munoz think the film is?
Well, she lands on this idea that the film has some really good ideas,
Yeah.
but they just aren't fleshed out enough. A key example she gives is the theme of memory, or what it means to be remembered. The review says the film kind of flirted with this idea, especially regarding Rasha the ghost, but it never fully explored it. And Mary feels digging into that could have added a lot more depth, more nuance.
That connects back to what you said earlier about it not being hard-hitting, maybe. Skimming the surface.
Precisely. That's essentially Mary Munoz's conclusion. She thinks the film, particularly because of the strong young leads, may well engage younger audiences. But for viewers wanting a deeper dive into Palestinian stories or the complex themes involved, she feels it skims the surface.
And her final verdict.
She wraps up by saying it never quite finds its feet in terms of genre and just can't quite settle into itself, though she does note it doesn't drag, runtime-wise. Oh, and she mentions it was screening at the Glasgow Film Festival at the time of the review.
Gotcha. So the picture Mary Munoz paints is, well, it's mixed, isn't it? A film with a potentially powerful setup, really good young actors, but one that, in her opinion, struggles to mesh the personal grief story with the heavy political reality it's set in, leading to this feeling of muddled identity and missed chances for deeper exploration, especially around memory and history.
That sums up her perspective pretty well, I think. It's a review that acknowledges the potential, but ultimately finds the execution wanting in key areas.
So bringing this deep dive into Mary Munoz's review toward a close, we've really unpacked how she saw A House in Jerusalem, a film using that grief and ghosts framework to tell a story within a very charged political landscape. The reviewer clearly admired the young leads, Locke and Farrell, but felt the film got tangled up trying to figure out its genre, had some plot holes, and crucially shied away from digging deeper into difficult themes like memory and identity within that specific political context.
Yeah, and thinking about her perspective, it really does make you consider the tightrope filmmakers walk, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to tell a personal, emotional story about loss while also acknowledging or even engaging with huge historical and political forces, especially if you are trying to make it accessible, maybe for a younger audience, as the reviewer suggests. How do you strike that balance? It's tricky.
It really is a fascinating challenge. And, the reviewer specifically honed in on how the film kind of touches on memory, what it means to be remembered, but doesn't fully commit, especially for Rasha, the ghost. Thinking about that specific point from Mary Munoz's review, what does it make you, listening now, wonder about the power and maybe the responsibility of storytelling when you're dealing with things like historical trauma, displacement, and just that fundamental human need for your story, your presence to be remembered?